Ren Porcio, topvelocity.net. 3x pitch biometrics here of Kyle Senneff from the 3x Velocity Camp. We're going to start through his delivery, looking at how he's loading his hips down the mound out of his leg lift. We're going to follow the hip angles graph and get an idea of the back leg positioning. So bottom left corner, you got red is your drive leg rotation, right rotation. Then you have abduction, adduction, and flexion, extension. We're looking just before leg drive, so it'd be about right here. We can see about 36 degrees of internal rotation in the back leg. We're trying to not go into that much internal rotation. Think about it. The leg is going to max around 35, 40, depending on the person. On average, that's probably where it's going to be. Many actually, that wouldn't even be the average. That would actually be good mobility of internal rotation. We don't want to be in that much internal rotation because there's not much more we can unload into. There's two components of back leg or biomechanical movements of back leg, which is rotation extension. If we're already at maximum rotation, we can't then unload into that movement. It will take power away. Also, too, that's the mechanism that helps drive hip rotation. So we're already at maximum in that position. And if you look at the abduction, it's at 6 degrees. So the reason we're at such a little abduction is because we're in so much internal rotation. We actually want to be in more abduction, less internal rotation. And then now we'll have room to still move the hips. Well, he has a lot of room to move the hips, but you'll have the internal rotation room to really power rotation. So if you want to know what that would look like, I remove this graph and bring in the drawing tool. It would look more like, say, the hips were here. Whoop, drawing tool didn't kick on. There we go. The hips would be here. Torso would be more neutral. And then the femur would go in this direction to that knee. And then down. Okay, so then this way you have more abduction. Here you have very little abduction, and this one above it. And then you'd have the external rotation to then unload into internal rotation. Okay, so I call this an anatomical stable back leg, not a muscle activated stable back leg. Difference is in an anatomical load, you're not really in a position to generate power. So your stability is here on the medial side of the knee. It's actually internally being loaded here in the hip, and then it's out on the back ankle. You're not in a position to where muscles are really activated. You're just pushing pressure on ligaments and tendons and all these areas. If you're in that activated position, so let me clear this out and go back in, but if you're in that muscle activated load where your hips were here, torso here, femur to the knee at this position, and then down, your stability is like I said, external. So you've got muscle activation back here in the external rotators in the glute. Then you've got stability, through the quad and ham. You've got stability through the calf. And so now all these muscles through the leg, are ready to fire and generate force against the rubber. So when you are in that more anatomical stable position, you're resting there. You're just not in a position to accelerate. There's good flexion coming out of the knee. Like I said, we're just in too much internal rotation and backward lean. So if we look at, the torso at this position and the hip, let's look at both. We can see the hip is all the way to the right, the blue side back 22. That should be close to more neutral, and then the forward bend is 8. That's fine because you have a lot of flexion and lean. But the trunk is 23 back and 46 forward. It's just there's a lot that you have to power, and you're not in a. So if you have all the trunk and hips leaning back over the leg, but you're not in a muscle activated position, you're not going to be able to really throw the trunk forward or throw the whip forward at that point, as you go into front foot strike. So, like I said, the goal for Kyle is to get into that more external rotation, more abducted position before he goes into leg drive. So let's move into front foot strike. All right, so going into front foot strike, what I'm looking for, and you can see it was kind of premature on back leg. I would ideally want to see at some point, as it starts to unload more into internal rotation, the drive leg really peaks. So you see coming out of leg lift, Kyle gets quickly into 30 plus internal rotation, and then it pushes into about 41, and then it starts to move into external as the hips rotate. There's just not enough unloading. So guys that would hold towards better, get in that better loaded position, you would see, say, 10 degrees of internal, and then it would dynamically shoot to like 40 degrees, and then the hips would rotate. And you would see that happen before the back hip started to come around. And that would show you that your back leg is really powering your back hip, which is more effective in creating hip to shoulder separation and more, and getting the hips to rotate a lot well into front foot strike. On top of that, we want to see extension. So if I pulled up, say, the graph of knee bend, I would want to see over here in the right graph trailing knee bend. I'd want to see the same thing. I wouldn't want to see that shoot to 0 ideally. It gets to about 18, and that needs to happen just before front foot strike, and that would be, you know, an indication of full extension. Obviously too, like to see ankle and hip extension, but you can see not a lot of really extension in the trail leg. You see it even after you land, which it should. I want to see it before. So he lands about right here, and there's 20 degrees of left of extension, and then the full load there was 70. I mean, there's some drive there, not bad, but ideally we want to go for full extension before front foot strike. So back to hip. Obviously, too, when we land, we want to see the hip extension, the blue one, be in, well into, I'd say where he is right here, about right there, 20 degrees of extension. That should have occurred at front foot. So that's a late hip rotation that we have going on. And front leg, too, we want to see that that's stabilizing at front foot strike. And it looks like, as we could look at the knee bends and everything. But at this point, I'd go to the kinematic sequence. We're working to get a linear kinematic sequence. This is just a angular, but still tells us how it's moving up the chain. This is showing us how energy is sequencing up the chain. You can see the blue dot goes first, which means the trail arm or the glove arm is pulling. I don't like to see that before the hips, because then that tells me that the hips or the trail arm is creating the rotation. I would want to see the red dot before the trail dot or the glove side dot, and that would tell me that hips are driving it. And that's why you can see when your red and greens go off, which is your hip speed to trunk speeds, they're pretty much close. That means there's really no separation. And if we bring out the tool looking at the hips to shoulders, we can see between these two lines, it's actually that there's no hip to shoulder separation there. It's a negative. And the whole way, it looked like the hips and shoulders stayed pretty much connected, which means no hip to shoulder separation. All right, so we can see late on the back leg drive, late to hip rotation, lead arm ahead of start peaking hip rotation. And because of that, you're just seeing a rotating trunk, not a lot of forward trunk in the final movement. So if we go to, chest, also too, let's do chest and pelvis. If we do chest and pelvis, we can see at front foot strike, the pelvis to the right, the forward bend was 6 degrees, which is fine. You want it to be somewhere neutral. And then the side bend was to the backside at 8 degrees, which is okay. Obviously, I'd like to see both those neutral. And then you can see the trunk was at front foot strike in a back or extended at 10 degrees and leaning back 15. That's all fine. It's just the hips are late. But then as they go into shoulder rotation, you hit pitch release, you're not seeing any forward bend. You're seeing chest at 8 degrees of forward bend. You know, if you take a high velocity pitcher, they're going to be around 50 degrees or 45 degrees. So just if you want to know what that would look like, that would look like basically the trunk being out here at the, you know, the moment the arm is at pitch release. So the big difference here, this is a rotating vertical trunk. Same time too, if you look at the orientation, you can see he's going way off to the left. Okay, if you have all that linear power, then your trunk maybe goes that far contralateral. That's too much contralateral. That means it's just rotating off at that point. So back to the hip to pelvis. You know, you can see on the side bend on the trunk 33 degrees, 25 becomes excessive. And studies show when you go past 25 to the contralateral side, velocity stops going up and torques go up. So it's not even a healthy position to really be in. If we go back to the knee graph, torso graph too. If we go back to the knee graph too, we don't see, as he goes to pitch release, all the left down to the bottom, lead knee bend, front foot strike, it hits at 68. It goes about 70. It loses a few degrees and then it tries to extend back, but nothing really dynamic. And then you can see when we talked about hip shoulder separation at front foot, all the way to the right, the blue hip chest rotation delta, we have only 12 degrees, but that's actually positive. You want it to be negative. So there's no hip to shoulder separation. So a lot here, you know, for Kyle to learn from. You know, what gets the trunk to move more linear, what improves hip to shoulder separation. It goes back to the back leg. Learning how to stabilize better in torsion. Let's just kind of go over that again. And learning how to then power out of that more dynamically. So, you know, landing a little bit more neutral with the hip and the trunk, okay? And then more external rotation with the knee. So this should be the knee, more abduction, more external rotation, and then you should be able to get more power out of that because it's a more muscle active position. The glutes will be more active, the thigh, the calf, all that will be more active to generate more power.